The morning sun cast long shadows across Miller's auto salvage, turning twisted metal into strange sculptures against the Oklahoma sky. Maya Rodriguez wiped grease from her hands on an old rag, the familiar weight of disappointment settling in her chest like sediment in still water. She'd been up since 4 a.m., sorting through the latest delivery of scrap vehicles, carefully separating aluminum from steel, copper from plastic, her mind racing with possibilities her father couldn't see. "Maya!" Frank Miller's voice cut through the morning air like a rusty blade. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Quit daydreaming and get those catalytic converters sorted. We got customers coming at 9. She looked up from the pristine organizational system she'd spent 3 hours perfecting, each material type arranged in calculated rows that would maximize efficiency and profit. Her father stood 30 yards away, coffee mug in one hand, cigarette dangling from his lips, surveying his kingdom of broken dreams and discarded machinery. To him, this junkyard was exactly what it appeared to be, a graveyard for things that had outlived their usefulness. To Maya, it was something entirely different. "Dad, I was thinking," she began, her voice carrying across the yard with the kind of hope that had been beaten down so many times it barely whispered anymore. "If we implemented a proper sorting system based on material composition and market demand, we could increase our revenue by at least 40%. I've been running the numbers, and with the new environmental regulations coming down from Washington, recycled materials are going to be..." Frank's laughter was harsh and bitter, cutting through her words like scissors through tissue paper. "Listen to yourself talking like some college professor about my business. This is scrap, Maya. Junk. Worthless garbage that people throw away when they're done with it." He gestured broadly at the acres of twisted metal surrounding them, his voice growing louder with each word. "Just like your fancy ideas. You're as worthless as this scrap, girl. When are you going to understand that?" The words hit her like physical blows, each syllable designed to diminish, to reduce, to remind her of her place in his carefully constructed hierarchy. Frank saw no reason to change what worked, especially not based on the ideas of a daughter who spent too much time reading technical journals and not enough time understanding the simple realities of running a business. But Maya saw things differently. Where Frank saw worthless junk, she saw rare earth elements that were becoming increasingly valuable as technology advanced. Where he saw old car batteries destined for the landfill, she saw lithium and cobalt that could be extracted and repurposed. Where he saw broken electronics as low-grade scrap metal, she saw circuit boards containing precious metals worth more per ounce than gold. Maya had taught herself chemistry from library books, studied metallurgy through online courses, and spent countless evenings researching market trends and environmental regulations. The disconnect between her vision and her father's had created a tension that hummed through the junkyard like electricity through copper wire. Maya would suggest improvements, innovations, new revenue streams, and Frank would dismiss them with the weary patience of someone explaining why the sky was blue to a child who insisted it was purple. She had spreadsheets full of data proving her theories, but Frank preferred the concrete reality of cash in hand over projections and possibilities. Their relationship had always been complicated. Maya's mother, Carmen Rodriguez, had died when Maya was 8, leaving behind a daughter who looked nothing like the Miller side of the family, and everything like the brilliant woman who had briefly illuminated Frank's life before cancer stole her away. Frank had never quite known what to do with a daughter who inherited her mother's analytical mind and stubborn determination. It was easier to treat her like an employee than to acknowledge that she might possess insights he lacked. Maya had learned early that love in the Miller household was expressed through work, through showing up, through proving your worth in practical terms. She had spent 14 years trying to prove herself valuable enough to earn her father's respect, taking on increasingly complex tasks, working longer hours, bringing home paychecks that contributed significantly to the family's survival. She managed the books, handled difficult customers, and had single-handedly modernized their inventory system. Yet every suggestion for improvement was met with the same dismissive response. She was young, inexperienced, naive about how the real world worked. The junkyard itself sprawled across 15 acres of Oklahoma clay, surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with barbed wire. Row upon row of vehicles in various stages of decay created a metallic maze that Maya could navigate blindfolded. There was the automotive section, where stripped cars sat like skeletons after the valuable parts had been harvested. The appliance area, where old refrigerators and washing machines waited to be broken down for their steel and copper components. The electronics corner, a newer addition that Maya had convinced Frank to create after proving that old computers and televisions contained valuable materials. Maya's favorite area was what she privately called the laboratory, a corner of the yard where she sorted and analyzed materials that didn't fit into Frank's traditional categories. Here, she separated rare earth magnets from old hard drives, collected catalytic converters for their platinum and palladium content, and carefully extracted circuit boards that contained traces of gold, silver, and other precious metals. It was meticulous work that required knowledge Frank didn't possess, and patience he couldn't understand. Every morning, Maya arrived at dawn to organize the previous day's acquisitions. She had developed a system that maximized the value of every item that entered the yard, categorizing materials not just by type but by purity, market demand, and potential applications. Her organizational skills had increased their profits by 23% over the past 2 years, though Frank attributed the improvement to preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. General market conditions rather than his daughter's innovations. Maya's workstation was a testament to organized efficiency, color-coded bins for different metal types, precise scales for weighing valuable components, and a database she had created to track market prices and identify trends. She had turned what Frank considered menial labor into a sophisticated operation that rival businesses were beginning to notice. Yet every time she tried to share her vision for expanding their operations, Frank shut her down with the same tired refrain about knowing her place and sticking to what worked. The frustration was becoming unbearable. Maya had ideas that could transform Miller's Auto Salvage from a small-time junkyard into a regional leader in sustainable materials recovery. She had researched grants available for green technology initiatives, identified potential partnerships with technology companies seeking reliable sources of recycled materials, and developed proposals for innovative processing techniques that could dramatically increase their profit margins. But Frank refused to listen to anything that challenged his established way of doing business. Maya's personal life had suffered under the weight of her father's expectations and dismissals. She had few friends, partly because her work schedule left little time for socializing, but mostly because she had learned to be suspicious of people who might judge her by her father's business or her own unconventional career path. Dating was particularly challenging in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Maya's combination of intelligence, ambition, and association with the junkyard made her an enigma that most people preferred to avoid. She lived in a small apartment above the office trailer, a space she had gradually transformed into a combination workshop and research center. Her evenings were spent analyzing material samples under a microscope she had purchased with her savings, reading technical journals, and developing theories about more efficient extraction and processing methods. Maya had essentially created a one-person research and development department within a business that her father insisted needed no development whatsoever. The contradiction was exhausting. During the day, she was Frank's obedient daughter, following his instructions and keeping her opinions to herself. But at night, she was Maya Rodriguez, innovator and visionary, working on projects that could revolutionize an industry that most people considered permanently stuck in the past. She lived 2 lives, and the tension between them was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Maya had begun to wonder if her father's dismissive attitude was less about business and more about control. Perhaps Frank kept her ideas at arm's length not because they were impractical, but because acknowledging their value would mean admitting that his daughter had surpassed him, that she understood aspects of their business that he never would. That possibility made their relationship even more painful, because it suggested that her father's love was conditional on her remaining smaller than him, less capable, forever in need of his guidance and approval. The morning sun was now fully above the horizon, casting the junkyard in the harsh light that revealed every flaw, every imperfection, every piece of rusted metal that somebody else had deemed worthless. Maya stood among the organized chaos of her father's empire, Knowing that she was capable of so much more than sorting scrap, yet trapped by circumstances that seemed as immovable as the mountains of twisted steel surrounding her. She didn't know that change was coming, that forces beyond her small world were already in motion, that her years of patient preparation were about to intersect with opportunities she had never dared to imagine. Maya's dedication to Miller's Auto Salvage had deep roots that stretched back to her earliest memories. When other children spent summers at camp or lounging by community pools, Maya had spent hers learning the intricate differences between various grades of steel, the telltale signs of copper contamination in wire bundles, and the precise techniques for extracting valuable components from seemingly worthless machinery. What began as childish curiosity had evolved into genuine expertise that Frank had never bothered to recognize or value. The transformation of Maya from reluctant helper to indispensable asset had happened gradually, almost invisibly. At 14, she had noticed that their main competitor, Henderson Salvage across town, was getting better prices for identical materials. Instead of accepting this as an unchangeable reality, Maya had spent weeks researching market conditions, calling potential buyers, and analyzing pricing structures. She discovered that Henderson was selling directly to specialized processors rather than going through middlemen, cutting out 2 layers of markup that were eating into Miller's profits. When Maya presented her findings to Frank, complete with contact information for direct buyers and projected revenue increases, he had listened with the distracted air of someone humoring a child's enthusiasm. He implemented her suggestions reluctantly, grumbling about the additional paperwork and phone calls required. When their monthly profits increased by 18%, Frank attributed the improvement to seasonal fluctuations rather than his daughter's research. Maya learned that day that recognition would always be scarce, but results spoke for themselves regardless of who claimed credit. Over the following years, Maya had quietly revolutionized nearly every aspect of their operation. She developed relationships with buyers that Frank couldn't have imagined, from electronics manufacturers seeking specific rare earth elements to art students looking for interesting materials for sculptures. Maya understood that value was contextual, that what appeared worthless to one person might be exactly what another person desperately needed. She created multiple revenue streams from materials that Frank would have sold as basic scrap metal. The electronics recycling program Maya had initiated 3 years earlier was perhaps her greatest achievement, though Frank viewed it as an unnecessary complication. Maya had recognized early that the digital revolution was creating massive amounts of electronic waste, and that this waste contained valuable materials that traditional salvage operations were ignoring. She convinced Frank to allocate a corner of the yard for electronics, arguing that the storage cost was minimal and the potential upside was significant. Maya taught herself electronics disassembly through online tutorials and technical manuals, learning to identify which components contained precious metals and which were only valuable for their base materials. She developed efficient processes for removing hard drives, extracting memory modules, and separating circuit boards by their gold content. Within 6 months, the electronics division was generating more profit per square foot than any other section of the yard. The success of the electronics program led Maya to expand into other specialized areas. She negotiated partnerships with local automotive shops to handle their used catalytic converters, which contained platinum, palladium, and rhodium. She established relationships with HVAC contractors who needed to dispose of old air conditioning units, focusing on the copper coils and rare earth magnets in the compressor motors. Maya even convinced Frank to accept contracts for demolition cleanup, where she could salvage architectural metals and vintage fixtures that commanded premium prices from restoration specialists. Each new initiative required Maya to master different technical skills and market dynamics. She studied chemical extraction processes to better understand how to prepare materials for maximum value. She learned about international commodity markets to time their sales for optimal pricing. Maya even taught herself basic metallurgy to identify alloy compositions that affected pricing structures. Her small apartment above the office had gradually transformed into a combination library, laboratory, and market research center. Frank's attitude toward Maya's innovations remained consistently skeptical. He viewed her improvements as unnecessary complications that made their simple business more complex without justification. When buyers praised the quality and consistency of their sorted materials, Frank assumed this was normal. When their profit margins consistently exceeded those of comparable operations, he attributed it to his own business acumen rather than Maya's innovations. The disconnect between Maya's contributions and Frank's recognition had become a source of constant tension. Maya's work schedule had become increasingly demanding as she took on more responsibilities without any reduction in her original duties. She still handled customer service, managed inventory, maintained their aging equipment, and performed the physical labor of sorting and processing materials. Additionally, she now managed complex logistics for specialized materials, maintained relationships with dozens of buyers, and continuously researched new opportunities for revenue generation. Maya was essentially running a sophisticated materials recovery operation, while Frank continued to treat it as a simple junkyard. The financial impact of Maya's contributions was undeniable, though Frank never acknowledged the connection between her initiatives and their improved profitability. Miller's Auto Salvage had grown from a marginal operation that barely covered expenses to a thriving business that generated enough profit for Frank to purchase new equipment and expand their facilities. Maya's innovations had created a sustainable competitive advantage that their rivals struggled to match, yet she received no additional compensation or recognition for her role in this transformation. Maya's expertise had begun attracting attention from outside the immediate area. Suppliers started specifically requesting her when they had unusual materials or complex sorting requirements. Other salvage operators occasionally called seeking advice about processing techniques or market conditions. Maya even received invitations to speak at regional industry conferences, though Frank dismissed these opportunities as wastes of time that would interfere with daily operations. The personal cost of Maya's dedication was substantial. Her social life had essentially disappeared under the weight of her responsibilities and her father's expectations. Maya worked 6 days a week, often staying late to complete projects or research new opportunities. Her few attempts at dating had ended badly when potential partners realized that her life revolved around the junkyard and her demanding father. Maya had sacrificed relationships, hobbies, and personal growth opportunities to build something she believed would eventually be recognized and valued. Maya's living situation exemplified her complicated relationship with the business. Her apartment above the office was technically part of her compensation, but it also meant she was never truly away from work. Frank could call upon her services at any hour, and often did. Maya's personal space was filled with work-related materials, technical manuals, and samples of interesting alloys she was analyzing. The boundary between her professional and personal life had completely dissolved, leaving her feeling trapped in a role that consumed her entire existence. The isolation was perhaps the most difficult aspect of Maya's situation. Frank's dismissive attitude had created an environment where Maya's achievements went unrecognized, and her suggestions were routinely ignored. She had no colleagues who understood her work or shared her vision for the industry's potential. Maya's expertise had grown far beyond what anyone in their small town could appreciate, leaving her feeling intellectually starved and emotionally disconnected from her community. Maya had begun documenting her innovations and discoveries in detailed journals, partly for her own reference, but increasingly as a way of validating her work. She recorded successful processing techniques, market analysis, and ideas for future improvements. These journals represented years of accumulated knowledge and experience that had never been formally acknowledged or credited. Maya sometimes wondered if anyone would ever understand the depth of expertise she had developed or the value of the systems she had created. The contradiction between Maya's capabilities and her circumstances had become increasingly apparent to everyone except Frank. Suppliers respected her knowledge and sought her opinions on complex technical matters. Buyers trusted her quality assessments and relied on her market insights. Industry publications had even quoted her observations about emerging trends in materials recovery. Yet in her own family business, Maya remained the subordinate daughter whose ideas were tolerated rather than celebrated. Frank's inability to recognize Maya's contributions stemmed from a combination of generational differences, gender bias, and personal insecurity. He had inherited a business model that worked adequately and saw no reason to complicate it with innovations he didn't understand. Frank's identity was tied to his role as the knowledgeable patriarch who guided his naive daughter through the complexities of business ownership. Acknowledging Maya's superior expertise would require him to admit that his understanding of the industry had become outdated and incomplete. The first significant crack in Maya's relationship with Frank had occurred the previous spring during a dispute over processing priorities. Maya had received a contract offer from a technology company seeking specific rare earth elements extracted from old hard drives. The contract would have required dedicating significant time and space to electronics processing, but it offered prices that were substantially higher than their normal buyers paid. Maya had calculated that accepting the contract would increase their quarterly profits by 35%. Frank had rejected the proposal without serious consideration, arguing that it would disrupt their established routines and create unnecessary complications. He expressed skepticism about the technology company's reliability and questioned whether Maya truly understood the full implications of the contract terms. The dismissal was particularly painful because Maya had spent weeks developing the relationship with the buyer and demonstrating their capability to meet the technical specifications required. Maya had tried to explain the strategic importance of diversifying their customer base and positioning themselves as specialists in high-value materials recovery. She presented detailed financial projections, highlighted the growing demand for recycled rare earth elements, and emphasized the competitive advantages they could develop through early adoption of advanced processing techniques. Frank listened with obvious impatience before concluding that their current approach was sufficient, and that change for the sake of change was foolish. The incident had marked a turning point in Maya's perception of her situation. For the first time, she began to question whether her father would ever be capable of seeing her as anything other than an assistant whose role was to implement his decisions rather than contribute to strategic planning. Maya realized that Frank's resistance to her ideas wasn't based on their merit, but on his need to maintain control and authority within the business relationship. Maya had responded to Frank's rejection by quietly documenting every aspect of the rejected contract, including the financial projections and the buyer's feedback about their capabilities. She began maintaining parallel records of opportunities that Frank declined, missed revenue due to outdated processing methods, and competitive disadvantages created by their failure to innovate. Maya wasn't planning anything specific, but she felt compelled to create a comprehensive record of the business potential that Frank was systematically ignoring. The pattern of rejection and dismissal had become more frequent as Maya's expertise deepened and her vision for the business expanded. Frank seemed increasingly threatened by suggestions that implied his approach was insufficient or outdated. He began interrupting Maya's explanations more quickly and dismissing her ideas with less consideration. The tension between them had evolved from occasional disagreements into a fundamental conflict about the direction and potential of Miller's Auto Salvage. Maya's frustration was compounded by her growing awareness of opportunities in the broader recycling industry. She followed trade publications, monitored government regulations, and tracked technological developments that were reshaping materials recovery. Maya could see that their industry was on the cusp of major changes driven by environmental concerns, resource scarcity, and technological innovation. Companies that positioned themselves correctly could benefit enormously from these trends, while those that clung to outdated methods would be left behind. The environmental regulations that Maya had been tracking represented a particularly significant opportunity. New federal requirements for electronic waste processing were creating demand for certified facilities that could handle complex materials responsibly. Maya had researched the certification process and determined that Miller's Auto Salvage could easily meet the technical requirements with minimal additional investment. The certification would open access to government contracts and corporate clients who needed to demonstrate environmental compliance. Maya had prepared a comprehensive proposal for pursuing environmental certification, including cost estimates, timeline projections, and revenue forecasts. She had identified potential funding sources, including grants specifically designed to help small businesses adopt sustainable practices. The proposal represented weeks of research and analysis, and Maya believed it offered a clear path to significant business expansion with manageable risk. Frank's response to the environmental certification proposal had been swift and decisive. He rejected it as an unnecessary complication that would subject their business to government oversight and regulatory burden. Frank argued that their current operations were profitable and sustainable, and that pursuing certification would create problems without corresponding benefits. He dismissed Maya's concerns about changing regulations and market conditions as academic speculation that had little relevance to their practical business needs. The rejection of the certification proposal had been particularly painful because Maya knew it represented their best opportunity to secure the business's long-term viability. She could see that environmental regulations would eventually make their current practices unsustainable, and that early adoption of compliance measures would provide competitive advantages. Frank's refusal to consider the proposal felt like a deliberate choice to limit the business's potential for reasons Maya couldn't understand or accept. Maya had begun to feel trapped between her loyalty to Frank and her responsibility to the business they had built together. She knew that her innovations and expertise had created value that Frank couldn't replicate, but she also knew that her contributions would never be fully recognized or appreciated. Maya faced the growing realization that her future success would require either convincing Frank to change his fundamental approach to business, or finding opportunities outside the family operation that had consumed her entire adult life. The summer heat pressed down on Miller's Auto Salvage like a weight that made everything harder to bear. Maya stood in the electronics section, carefully extracting platinum from catalytic converter cores, while sweat dripped onto the concrete floor beneath her feet. The radio crackled with news about rising commodity prices and new federal initiatives for sustainable manufacturing. Information that would have excited her months earlier but now felt like salt in an open wound. Frank's dismissals had become more frequent and more cutting, as Maya's expertise continued to outpace his understanding. What had once been occasional disagreements about business direction had evolved into daily conflicts over everything from processing methods to customer relations. Frank seemed determined to assert his authority by rejecting any suggestion that implied Maya possessed knowledge he lacked, regardless of the potential benefits to their operation. The pattern had become predictable and soul-crushing. Maya would identify an opportunity, research its implications, develop a comprehensive proposal, and present her findings with careful attention to Frank's concerns and preferences. Frank would listen with obvious impatience, before dismissing her ideas as impractical, unnecessary, or beyond their capabilities. The cycle repeated endlessly, with each rejection reinforcing Frank's conviction that his daughter's ambitions exceeded her understanding of reality. Maya's most recent frustration involved a partnership opportunity with Hartwell Industries, a regional manufacturer that needed reliable suppliers of recycled rare earth elements for their production processes. Hartwell had approached Maya directly after hearing about her expertise in materials processing from one of their mutual contacts. The company offered a long-term contract that would guarantee steady demand for specialized materials at premium prices, essentially creating a stable foundation for significant business expansion. The Hartwell contract represented everything Maya had been working toward: recognition of her technical capabilities, financial rewards for innovation, and an opportunity to establish Miller's Auto Salvage as a leader in advanced materials recovery. Maya had spent 3 weeks developing detailed proposals for meeting Hartwell's specifications, including equipment upgrades, process modifications, and quality control measures. She had calculated that the contract would increase their annual revenue by 60%, while positioning them for additional partnerships with similar companies. Frank had rejected the Hartwell proposal without reviewing Maya's analysis or meeting with their representatives. He argued that long-term contracts created obligations they might not be able to fulfill, and that specializing in rare earth elements would make them vulnerable to market fluctuations. Frank expressed skepticism about Hartwell's financial stability and questioned whether Maya truly understood the technical requirements involved in their proposed processing methods. Maya had tried to address each of Frank's concerns with additional research and documentation. She provided Hartwell's financial statements, detailed technical specifications, and references from other suppliers who had worked successfully with the company. Maya even arranged for Hartwell's engineers to visit the yard and assess their capabilities firsthand. Nothing she did could overcome Frank's fundamental resistance to any change that might require him to acknowledge her superior expertise. The rejection of the Hartwell contract had marked a turning point in Maya's relationship with her father. For the first time, she began to question whether Frank's dismissive attitude was motivated by business concerns or by his unwillingness to accept that his daughter had surpassed him professionally. Maya realized that Frank might be more interested in maintaining his position as the ultimate authority than in maximizing the business's potential for success. Maya's daily interactions with Frank had become increasingly tense as his criticism grew more personal and less constructive. Frank questioned her judgment on routine matters where she had previously been trusted to make independent decisions. He began second-guessing her customer interactions, challenging her pricing decisions, and expressing doubt about her ability to handle complex technical requirements. The erosion of trust felt deliberate and systematic, as if Frank was trying to undermine her confidence in her own capabilities. The situation had become particularly difficult because Maya could see that Frank's approach was beginning to hurt their competitive position. Henderson Salvage had hired a young engineer who was implementing exactly the kind of innovations that Maya had been proposing for years. Regional competitors were investing in advanced processing equipment and pursuing environmental certifications that would give them access to higher-value contracts. Miller's Auto Salvage was falling behind in an industry that was rapidly evolving, while Frank remained convinced that their traditional methods were sufficient. Maya had tried approaching Frank through different strategies, hoping to find a communication method that would allow him to hear her concerns without feeling threatened. She presented ideas as questions rather than recommendations, framing innovations as ways to support his existing vision rather than replace it. Maya even suggested bringing in outside consultants to evaluate their operations, thinking that Frank might be more receptive to suggestions from neutral experts. Nothing worked. Frank seemed to interpret any suggestion for improvement as implicit criticism of his leadership, and he responded with increasingly defensive and dismissive reactions. Maya began to suspect that Frank viewed their relationship as zero-sum, where acknowledging her capabilities would necessarily diminish his own authority and status. The possibility that they could both benefit from her innovations seemed beyond his capacity to imagine or accept. Maya's isolation within her own family business had become increasingly apparent to their customers and suppliers. People who called seeking her expertise were often redirected to Frank, who lacked the technical knowledge to answer their questions effectively. Potential clients who had developed relationships with Maya found themselves dealing with Frank's suspicion and resistance when they tried to discuss specialized requirements or innovative processing methods. The professional relationships Maya had carefully cultivated over years of dedicated work were beginning to suffer from Frank's interference and skepticism. Buyers who trusted Maya's quality assessments were frustrated by Frank's tendency to second-guess her recommendations. Suppliers who valued Maya's technical insights found themselves excluded from conversations about complex materials or processing challenges. Maya watched helplessly as Frank's insecurity and controlling behavior damaged relationships that represented years of effort and expertise. Maya's living situation had become increasingly uncomfortable as the tension between her and Frank spilled over into their personal interactions. Frank's criticism followed her into the apartment above the office, where he would appear unexpectedly to question her decisions or challenge her priorities. Maya felt like she was under constant surveillance, with Frank monitoring her work and personal activities for signs that she was overstepping the boundaries he had established. The emotional toll of Frank's dismissive treatment had begun affecting Maya's health and well-being. She found herself questioning decisions that she would have made confidently in the past, second-guessing her own expertise, and feeling anxious about interactions that should have been routine. Maya realized that Frank's systematic undermining of her confidence was making her less effective at work she had once performed with exceptional skill and assurance. Maya had begun documenting Frank's rejections and dismissals more systematically, not because she was planning any specific action, but because she needed some way to validate her own perceptions of what was happening. The pattern of behavior she recorded was clear and undeniable. Frank was rejecting profitable opportunities, dismissing valuable innovations, and undermining productive relationships solely to maintain his position as the ultimate decision-maker within their operation. The documentation process had helped Maya understand that her situation was not normal or acceptable. Other business owners would have been thrilled to have an employee with her capabilities and dedication, regardless of family relationships. Maya's contributions had objective value that could be measured and verified, and Frank's refusal to acknowledge this value said more about his limitations than about her performance. Maya's research into industry trends had revealed that their competitors were increasingly adopting the kinds of innovations she had been proposing for years. Companies that embraced advanced processing methods and environmental compliance were winning contracts and expanding their operations, while traditional salvage yards struggled with declining margins and shrinking market share. Maya could see that Frank's resistance to change was putting their business at risk, but she had no power to implement necessary adaptations without his approval. The breaking point came on a sweltering Tuesday morning in late August, when Maya received a call that would change everything. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the director of the National Materials Recovery Initiative, was calling to discuss Maya's research into rare earth element extraction from electronic waste. Maya had submitted a technical paper to an industry conference 8 months earlier, and Dr. Chen had been following her subsequent publications with great interest. Dr. Chen explained that the federal government was launching a major initiative to reduce America's dependence on foreign sources of rare earth elements by developing domestic recycling capabilities. The program would provide funding, technical support, and regulatory assistance to companies that could demonstrate innovative processing methods and reliable production capacity. Maya's published research had identified her as exactly the kind of innovator the program was designed to support. The conversation with Dr. Chen revealed opportunities that Maya had never imagined possible. The federal initiative included grants for equipment purchases, contracts for processed materials, and technical assistance for scaling up operations. Companies that qualified for the program would gain access to government clients, university research partnerships, and international markets for recycled rare earth elements. Maya's expertise in electronics processing and her documented innovations made her an ideal candidate for program participation. Dr. Chen invited Maya to submit a formal application for the National Materials Recovery Initiative, explaining that successful participants would receive substantial funding and long-term purchase commitments from federal agencies. The program was specifically designed to support small businesses with innovative approaches to materials recovery, and Maya's combination of technical expertise and practical experience made her application highly competitive. Maya ended the call with Dr. Chen feeling simultaneously excited and terrified. The opportunity represented everything she had been working toward: recognition of her capabilities, financial resources for expansion, and the chance to implement innovations on a scale that could have national impact. But pursuing the opportunity would require Frank's cooperation and support, resources she knew he would never provide willingly. Maya spent the rest of that day thinking about Dr. Chen's invitation and its implications for her future. The federal program offered a path to success that didn't depend on Frank's approval or recognition, but it would require her to make choices about her relationship with the family business and her role in its future. Maya realized that she had reached a point where her continued growth would require either Frank's transformation or her own liberation from his limitations. The weight of the decision pressed down on Maya like the oppressive August heat. She could continue accepting Frank's dismissals and limitations, remaining safely within the confines of her current role, while watching opportunities pass by. Or she could risk everything by pursuing possibilities that Frank would never understand or support, potentially destroying their relationship while creating the future she had always envisioned. Maya stood in the electronics section that evening, surrounded by the materials and systems she had developed over years of dedicated work, knowing that her response to Dr. Chen's invitation would determine whether her expertise would remain buried in a small-town junkyard, or whether it would finally receive the recognition and support it deserved. The choice was hers alone to make, and she knew that whatever decision she reached would change everything. Frank appeared in the doorway of the electronics section as Maya was finishing her work for the day. His presence felt intrusive and unwelcome, but Maya forced herself to maintain the facade of normalcy that had become increasingly difficult to sustain. Frank surveyed her organized workspace with the critical eye of someone looking for flaws rather than appreciating accomplishments. "Maya," Frank said, his voice carrying the familiar tone of barely contained frustration, "we need to talk about your priorities. I've been watching you spend too much time on these fancy projects, when there's real work that needs doing. This electronics nonsense is taking up space and energy that could be better used on profitable activities." Maya looked at her father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Frank stood surrounded by evidence of her innovations and expertise, yet he remained convinced that her work was worthless distraction rather than valuable contribution. The disconnect between reality and his perceptions was so complete that Maya finally understood the futility of trying to earn his recognition or approval. "Dad," Maya said quietly, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "This electronics section generates more profit per square foot than any other part of the yard. The buyers I've developed pay premium prices for materials you would have sold as basic scrap. The systems I've created have increased our revenue by hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past few years." Frank's expression hardened with the defensive anger of someone whose authority was being questioned. "Don't lecture me about my own business, Maya. I've been running this operation since before you were born, and I know what works and what doesn't. Your college ideas and fancy theories don't mean anything if they don't translate into real money in the bank." Maya felt something inside her shift and crystallize, like metal reaching its melting point and suddenly transforming into something entirely different. The years of accumulated frustration, dismissed innovations, and unrecognized contributions suddenly coalesced into a clarity that was both liberating and terrifying. She realized that Frank would never see her value because doing so would require him to acknowledge his own limitations. "You're right, Dad," Maya said, her voice calm and controlled. "This is your business, and you have every right to run it however you choose. But you're wrong about one thing. These innovations have translated into real money, more money than you've ever bothered to calculate or acknowledge. The question isn't whether my work has value. The question is whether you'll ever be capable of seeing that value." Frank's face flushed with anger at Maya's calm defiance of his authority. "You think you know better than me? You think your book learning makes you smarter than someone who's been in this business for 30 years? Let me tell you something, girl. You're as worthless as this scrap metal if you can't follow simple instructions and respect the hierarchy around here." The words hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud, poisoning whatever remained of their professional relationship and their family bond. Maya felt the familiar sting of his dismissal, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Relief. Frank had finally said what they both knew he believed, and Maya no longer had to pretend that earning his respect was possible or worth pursuing. Maya looked around the electronics section one final time, seeing years of work and innovation that had never been appreciated or valued by the person whose opinion had mattered most to her. She thought about Dr. Chen's invitation, about the federal program that recognized her expertise, about the possibility of a future where her capabilities would be celebrated rather than dismissed. "You know what, Dad?" Maya said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You're absolutely right. I am worthless here because you've made it impossible for me to contribute my real value to this operation. But that doesn't mean I'm worthless everywhere else." Frank stared at his daughter with confusion and growing alarm, sensing that something fundamental had changed in their dynamic, but not understanding what or why. Maya felt a strange sense of peace settling over her as she finally stopped trying to prove herself to someone who was determined never to see her worth. Maya walked past Frank toward the office trailer, leaving him standing alone among the organized materials and sophisticated systems that represented everything he had rejected and dismissed. She climbed the stairs to her apartment with steady steps, knowing that her life was about to change in ways that Frank could never imagine or control. The girl who had spent 14 years trying to earn her father's recognition was gone, replaced by a woman who finally understood her own value regardless of his opinion. Maya spent the night in her apartment above the office, but sleep eluded her completely. Instead, she sat at her small desk surrounded by years of research, technical papers, and documentation of innovations that Frank had consistently dismissed. The conversation with Dr. Chen felt like a lifeline thrown to someone who had been drowning in unrecognized potential, and Maya found herself reviewing every detail of their discussion with growing excitement and determination. The National Materials Recovery Initiative represented more than just an opportunity for funding or recognition. It was validation that her expertise had value beyond the narrow confines of Miller's auto salvage, that her innovations could contribute to something larger and more important than a family business that refused to acknowledge her capabilities. Maya realized that she had been thinking too small, limiting herself to improvements that Frank might eventually accept, rather than pursuing possibilities that matched her true potential. Maya opened her laptop and began drafting her response to Dr. Chen's invitation. The application process would require detailed technical documentation, financial projections, and evidence of her ability to scale up operations to meet federal requirements. Fortunately, Maya had been maintaining meticulous records of her innovations and results for years, driven by a professional instinct that Frank had never understood or valued. The federal program's requirements aligned perfectly with Maya's expertise and vision. The initiative sought companies that could demonstrate innovative processing methods, reliable quality control, and the capacity for significant expansion. Maya's documentation showed consistent improvements in extraction efficiency, material purity, and cost reduction across multiple processing categories. Her work represented exactly the kind of domestic innovation that the program was designed to support and accelerate. Maya worked through the night, organizing her research into a comprehensive application that demonstrated her technical capabilities and business potential. She included detailed process descriptions, financial analysis, and projections for scaling up operations to meet federal demand. The application revealed the depth of expertise Maya had developed over years of dedicated work, expertise that Frank had dismissed as academic speculation with no practical value. As dawn approached, Maya realized that pursuing the federal opportunity would require more than just submitting an application. She would need operational independence, financial resources, and the freedom to implement innovations without Frank's interference. The logical solution was both obvious and terrifying. Maya would need to establish her own operation, separate from Miller's Auto Salvage and Frank's controlling influence. Maya spent the morning researching the practical requirements for starting an independent materials recovery business. She investigated equipment costs, facility requirements, regulatory compliance, and market opportunities. The financial projections were encouraging, especially considering the federal funding and long-term contracts available through Dr. Chen's program. Maya's expertise and established relationships would provide significant advantages in launching a new operation. The decision to leave Miller's Auto Salvage felt both liberating and heartbreaking. Maya had invested 14 years of her life in building something she believed would eventually be recognized and valued. Walking away meant abandoning not just her work but also her relationship with Frank, acknowledging that their fundamental differences were irreconcilable. Yet Maya understood that staying would mean accepting permanent limitation and systematic dismissal of her capabilities. Maya began making discreet inquiries about commercial properties suitable for materials processing operations. She contacted equipment suppliers to discuss financing options for specialized machinery. Maya even reached out to some of her established buyers to gauge their interest in working with an independent operation that could offer more sophisticated processing and consistent quality. The responses were uniformly positive, confirming that Maya's expertise and reputation had value in the broader market. Frank's reaction to Maya's newfound independence was predictably negative. He noticed her distraction and questioned her commitment to daily operations. Frank seemed to sense that something had changed in their dynamic, but he couldn't identify the specific cause of Maya's transformation. His response was to become more controlling and critical, inadvertently reinforcing Maya's decision to pursue independence. Maya submitted her application to the National Materials Recovery Initiative on a Friday morning, using the office computer while Frank was meeting with a scrap metal buyer. The application represented months of research and years of accumulated expertise, compressed into a document that demonstrated her potential to contribute to national resource security. Maya felt a profound sense of accomplishment as she clicked the submit button, knowing that her work would finally receive the serious evaluation it deserved. The waiting period after submitting her application was simultaneously exciting and agonizing. Maya continued her daily work at Miller's Auto Salvage, but her heart was no longer invested in Frank's vision for their operation. She found herself mentally planning her independent business, imagining the innovations she could implement without interference, and anticipating the satisfaction of being recognized for her true capabilities. Maya's research into independent operations revealed opportunities she had never considered while working within Frank's limitations. Environmental consulting services, specialized processing contracts, and research partnerships were all possibilities that her expertise could support. Maya began to understand that her knowledge and skills had applications far beyond traditional salvage operations, applications that could generate both financial success and meaningful impact. 3 weeks after submitting her application, Maya received a call from Dr. Chen with news that would change everything. The National Materials Recovery Initiative had accepted Maya's application and was prepared to offer her a comprehensive support package that included equipment funding, technical assistance, and long-term purchase commitments. The program officials had been impressed by Maya's technical expertise and practical experience, particularly her innovations in rare earth element extraction and processing. Dr. Chen explained that Maya's operation would become a pilot program for the federal initiative, demonstrating how small businesses could contribute to national resource independence through innovative recycling methods. The program would provide not just funding but also connections to research institutions, access to advanced equipment, and opportunities to influence policy development. Maya's expertise would help shape the future of materials recovery in America. The financial terms of the federal support were beyond Maya's most optimistic projections. The program offered equipment grants, facility improvement funds, and guaranteed purchase contracts that would ensure profitability from the first month of operations. Maya would have access to technical support from national laboratories, consulting services from industry experts, and marketing assistance to develop additional commercial relationships. Maya accepted the federal offer immediately, knowing that such opportunities were rare and might never be repeated. The program officials scheduled a site visit to evaluate potential locations for her operation and discuss implementation timelines. Maya would need to establish her business within 6 months to maintain her program eligibility, a timeline that was ambitious but achievable given her preparation and expertise. The process of establishing Rodriguez Materials Recovery moved forward with surprising speed once Maya committed to independence. She found a suitable facility in the industrial district of Tulsa, about an hour from Millfield, with adequate space for processing operations and room for future expansion. The location provided access to transportation networks, skilled workers, and potential customers, while maintaining enough distance from Miller's Auto Salvage to avoid direct competition. Maya's departure from Miller's Auto Salvage was handled with careful professionalism, despite the emotional complexity of the situation. She provided Frank with detailed documentation of her ongoing projects, contact information for her established buyers, and instructions for maintaining the systems she had developed. Maya's transition plan ensured that Frank could continue operating without disruption, though he would lose access to her expertise and innovations. Frank's reaction to Maya's departure was a mixture of anger, confusion, and grudging respect. He had never expected his daughter to possess the independence or resources necessary to establish her own operation. Frank's dismissive attitude toward Maya's capabilities made her success feel like a personal rebuke, challenging his assumptions about her limitations and his own superiority. Maya's first months as an independent operator exceeded all expectations. The federal program provided resources and support that allowed her to implement innovations she had been developing for years. Her processing efficiency, material quality, and customer service quickly established Rodriguez Materials Recovery as a regional leader in specialized recycling. Maya's expertise, finally freed from Frank's limitations, flourished in an environment that valued innovation and rewarded excellence. The media attention that followed Maya's success was both gratifying and overwhelming. Trade publications featured articles about her innovative processing methods and rapid business growth. Environmental groups praised her contributions to resource conservation and sustainable manufacturing. Maya found herself invited to speak at conferences, consult on policy development, and advise other entrepreneurs seeking to enter the materials recovery industry. Maya's success had broader implications for the communities she served. Rodriguez Materials Recovery created jobs for skilled workers, provided environmental benefits through improved recycling practices, and generated tax revenue for local governments. Maya's operation demonstrated how technical expertise and innovation could create prosperity while addressing environmental challenges, inspiring other entrepreneurs to pursue similar opportunities. The pinnacle of Maya's recognition came on a Tuesday morning in March, when her secretary announced an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was formal and professional, introducing himself as a representative from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Maya's work with the National Materials Recovery Initiative had attracted attention at the highest levels of government, and President Harrison wanted to personally acknowledge her contributions to national resource security. Maya's conversation with the president was surreal and deeply moving. President Harrison praised her technical innovations, her business success, and her role in demonstrating how American entrepreneurs could address strategic challenges through creativity and determination. The president announced that Maya would receive the National Innovation Award at a White House ceremony, recognizing her contributions to both environmental protection and economic development. The phone call with President Harrison validated every sacrifice Maya had made and every challenge she had overcome. Her expertise, dismissed by Frank as worthless academic speculation, was now recognized as valuable enough to merit presidential attention. Maya's journey from undervalued daughter to nationally recognized innovator demonstrated the power of perseverance and the importance of believing in one's own capabilities. Maya's success had ripple effects that extended far beyond her personal achievements. Rodriguez's materials recovery became a model for other small businesses seeking to participate in federal sustainability initiatives. Maya's processing methods were adopted by operations across the country, improving efficiency and environmental performance throughout the industry. Her story inspired other entrepreneurs to pursue opportunities in emerging green technologies. The irony of Maya's success was not lost on the residents of Millfield, who had watched Frank dismiss his daughter's capabilities for years. Miller's Auto Salvage continued operating, but it gradually lost market share to more innovative competitors who adopted the kinds of technologies Maya had pioneered. Frank's refusal to recognize his daughter's expertise had cost him not just her contributions, but also his competitive position in a rapidly evolving industry. Maya's relationship with Frank remained complicated, but gradually improved as he came to understand the magnitude of her achievements. Frank's initial anger and defensiveness gave way to a grudging pride in his daughter's success, though he never fully acknowledged his role in driving her away. Maya maintained cordial relations with her father, but their interactions were now conducted between equals, rather than within the old hierarchy that had constrained her potential. Maya's White House visit was a surreal experience that crystallized her transformation from dismissed daughter to nationally recognized expert. Standing in the Oval Office, receiving congratulations from the president, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The girl who had been told she was worthless as scrap metal had become a woman whose innovations were valued at the highest levels of government. The ceremony honoring Maya's achievements was attended by industry leaders, government officials, and environmental advocates who recognized her contributions to both economic development and resource conservation. Maya's acceptance speech emphasized the importance of recognizing and nurturing expertise regardless of its source, and the value of persistence in pursuing innovative solutions to complex challenges. Maya returned to Oklahoma with a deeper understanding of her own capabilities and a clearer vision for her future contributions. Rodriguez's materials recovery continued growing, expanding into new markets and developing additional innovations that furthered both profitability and environmental protection. Maya's success had proven that expertise and dedication could overcome any limitation, including the narrow vision of those who claimed to know what was possible. The transformation of Maya Rodriguez from undervalued junkyard worker to nationally recognized innovator became a powerful example of American entrepreneurship and determination. Her story demonstrated that expertise and innovation could emerge from unexpected places, that family limitations need not define personal potential, and that recognition of true value was ultimately inevitable for those who persevered through temporary dismissal. Maya's journey from Frank's dismissive daughter to President Harrison's honored guest proved that worth is not determined by others' recognition, but by the courage to pursue one's own vision despite opposition. Her success validated every innovation Frank had dismissed, every suggestion he had ignored, and every moment of expertise he had failed to value. The scrap metal that Frank had used to define Maya's worth became the foundation for achievements that exceeded his capacity to imagine or appreciate. Rodriguez's materials recovery continued operating as a testament to the power of recognizing and nurturing expertise, regardless of its source or the skepticism it might initially encounter. Maya's story inspired countless others to pursue their own innovative visions, proving that true value always finds recognition among those wise enough to appreciate it. The weight of Frank's words still echoed in Maya's mind as she climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment that night. But something had fundamentally shifted inside her. The sting of being called worthless as scrap metal no longer felt like a wound that needed healing. Instead, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place, revealing a picture she had been too close to see clearly. Maya understood now that Frank's inability to recognize her value said nothing about her worth, and everything about his limitations. Maya sat at her small kitchen table with Dr. Chen's business card in front of her, running her fingers over the embossed federal seal while her mind processed the magnitude of the opportunity before her. The National Materials Recovery Initiative wasn't just offering funding or contracts. They were offering her a chance to prove that innovation could emerge from the most unlikely places, that expertise developed in a small-town junkyard could contribute to national priorities and global challenges. The irony wasn't lost on her. Frank had spent years dismissing her ideas as impractical academic theories with no real-world application. Yet here was the federal government, represented by one of the nation's leading materials scientists, seeking exactly the kind of innovations Maya had been developing in obscurity. The disconnect between Frank's perception and reality was so complete that Maya finally understood the futility of seeking his validation. Maya pulled out her laptop and began researching Dr. Chen's background and the scope of the federal initiative. What she discovered exceeded her most optimistic expectations. The National Materials Recovery Initiative was a multi-billion-dollar program designed to reduce American dependence on foreign sources of critical materials by developing domestic recycling and processing capabilities. The program had bipartisan support, substantial funding, and the backing of multiple federal agencies. Dr. Chen wasn't just any government bureaucrat. She was a former MIT professor who had pioneered several breakthrough technologies in materials science before joining the federal government to translate academic research into practical applications. Her team included some of the most respected experts in metallurgy, environmental engineering, and industrial processing. These were people who understood innovation and recognized expertise regardless of where it originated. Maya spent the night reading through program documents, technical specifications, and case studies of successful participants. The federal initiative was specifically designed to support exactly the kind of work she had been doing at Miller's Auto Salvage, but on a scale that could have national impact. Participants received not just funding but access to advanced research facilities, partnerships with universities, and connections to international markets for recycled materials. The application process was rigorous but straightforward. Maya needed to document her technical capabilities, demonstrate her processing innovations, and present a business plan for scaling up operations. Fortunately, she had been maintaining detailed records of her work for years, driven by a professional instinct that Frank had never understood. Maya's documentation was comprehensive enough to support multiple applications. Maya began drafting her application at dawn, energized by a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since starting work at the junkyard, she was presenting her ideas to people who had the expertise to evaluate them fairly and the authority to provide resources for implementation. Maya wasn't asking for permission or approval from someone determined to diminish her capabilities. She was offering her expertise to people who understood its value. The technical sections of Maya's application revealed the depth of knowledge she had accumulated over years of independent research and experimentation. Her innovations in rare earth element extraction were more advanced than techniques being used by established companies with much larger resources. Maya's processing methods were more efficient, more environmentally friendly, and more cost-effective than industry standards. Maya's financial projections showed that her innovations could generate substantial profits while addressing critical national needs. The domestic recycling of rare earth elements would reduce American dependence on politically unstable foreign suppliers, while creating high-paying jobs in economically disadvantaged regions. Maya's work represented exactly the kind of strategic thinking that government planners had been seeking. Maya submitted her application on a Friday morning, using the office computer while Frank was distracted by a delivery of crushed vehicles. The moment she clicked the submit button, Maya felt a profound sense of liberation. she had finally presented her true capabilities to people qualified to appreciate them. Regardless of the outcome, Maya had taken the first step toward independence from Frank's limiting vision. The waiting period after submitting her application was both anxious and exhilarating. Maya continued her daily work at Miller's Auto Salvage, but her perspective had completely changed. She was no longer trying to convince Frank of her value or seeking his approval for her innovations. Maya was simply maintaining operations while preparing for opportunities that Frank couldn't imagine or control. Maya used the waiting period to research the practical requirements for establishing an independent materials processing operation. She investigated commercial real estate options, equipment suppliers, regulatory requirements, and potential employees. Maya discovered that her years of experience at Miller's Auto Salvage had provided her with comprehensive knowledge of every aspect of the business, from customer relations to regulatory compliance. Maya's established relationships with buyers and suppliers would provide significant advantages in launching an independent operation. Many of her contacts had expressed frustration with Frank's conservative approach and resistance to innovation. Maya realized that her reputation for expertise and reliability had value beyond the confines of Miller's Auto Salvage. 3 weeks after submitting her application, Maya received a call that would change her life forever. Dr. Chen's voice was professional but warm as she delivered news that Maya had barely dared to hope for. The National Materials Recovery Initiative had not only accepted Maya's application but had designated her operation as a flagship demonstration project for the entire program. Dr. Chen explained that Maya's combination of technical innovation and practical experience was exactly what the program needed to prove that American entrepreneurs could address strategic challenges through creativity and determination. Maya's processing methods were so advanced that program officials wanted to use her operation as a model for other participants across the country. The support package offered to Maya exceeded her most optimistic projections. The federal program would provide equipment grants totaling $800,000, facility improvement funds of $300,000, and guaranteed purchase contracts worth over $2 million annually for the first 5 years. Maya would also have access to technical support from national laboratories, consulting services from industry experts, and marketing assistance to develop additional commercial relationships. Maya accepted the federal offer immediately, understanding that such opportunities were once-in-a-lifetime events that required decisive action. Dr. Chen scheduled a site visit for the following week to begin the implementation process. Maya would need to establish her independent operation within 6 months to maintain program eligibility, a timeline that was ambitious but achievable given her preparation and expertise. Maya's decision to leave Miller's Auto Salvage and establish Rodriguez Materials Recovery was the culmination of years of preparation and months of careful planning. She had always known that her expertise could support an independent operation, but she had lacked the confidence and resources to make the transition. The federal program provided both the validation and the financial support necessary to pursue independence. Maya's departure from Miller's Auto Salvage was handled with professional courtesy despite the personal complexity of the situation. She provided Frank with comprehensive documentation of her systems and processes, ensuring that he could continue operating without disruption. Maya's transition plan demonstrated the thoroughness and consideration that had characterized her work throughout their relationship. Frank's reaction to Maya's departure was a mixture of shock, anger, and grudging respect. He had never imagined that his daughter possessed the independence or capability necessary to establish her own operation, especially not one with federal backing and national significance. Frank's years of dismissing Maya's expertise made her success feel like a personal indictment of his judgment and leadership. Maya found a perfect facility for Rodriguez Materials Recovery in the Tulsa Industrial District, about 70 miles from Millfield. The location provided access to transportation networks, skilled workers, and potential customers while maintaining enough distance from Miller's Auto Salvage to avoid direct competition. The facility had adequate space for current operations and room for the expansion that federal contracts would require. The first months of operating Rodriguez Materials Recovery exceeded every expectation Maya had dared to hold. The federal program provided resources and technical support that allowed her to implement innovations she had been developing for years. Maya's processing efficiency quickly surpassed industry standards, while her material quality earned recognition from the most demanding customers. Maya's success attracted attention from media outlets, industry publications, and environmental organizations interested in sustainable manufacturing. Her story of transformation from dismissed junkyard worker to federally supported innovator resonated with audiences seeking examples of American entrepreneurship and determination. Maya found herself invited to speak at conferences, consult on policy development, and advise other entrepreneurs. Rodriguez Materials recovery created ripple effects throughout the regional economy. Maya's operation provided jobs for skilled technicians, generated tax revenue for local governments, and demonstrated how innovation could create prosperity while addressing environmental challenges. Her success inspired other entrepreneurs to pursue opportunities in emerging green technologies. Maya's processing innovations became the standard for the entire National Materials Recovery Initiative. Her methods were adopted by operations across the country, improving efficiency and environmental performance throughout the domestic recycling industry. Maya's expertise, developed in obscurity at Miller's Auto Salvage, had become the foundation for national policy and industrial transformation. The pinnacle of Maya's recognition came on a Tuesday morning in March, when her secretary announced an unexpected call from Washington. The voice on the other end was formal and respectful, identifying himself as a representative from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Maya's contributions to the National Materials Recovery Initiative had attracted attention at the highest levels of government. President Harrison had personally reviewed Maya's file and wanted to acknowledge her role in demonstrating how American innovation could address strategic challenges while creating economic opportunity. The president had decided to present Maya with the National Innovation Award at a White House ceremony, recognizing her contributions to both national security and environmental protection. Maya's conversation with President Harrison was surreal and deeply meaningful. The president praised her technical expertise, her business success, and her demonstration that innovation could emerge from unexpected places when nurtured with proper support and recognition. President Harrison emphasized that Maya's story embodied the best of American entrepreneurship and determination. The White House ceremony honoring Maya's achievements was attended by industry leaders, government officials, and environmental advocates who understood the significance of her contributions. Maya's acceptance speech emphasized the importance of recognizing expertise regardless of its source, and the value of supporting innovation even when it challenges conventional thinking. Maya's transformation from Frank's dismissed daughter to President Harrison's honored guest represented more than personal success. Her story demonstrated that expertise and innovation could emerge from any environment when supported by recognition and resources. Maya's journey proved that worth is determined not by others' acknowledgement, but by the courage to pursue one's vision despite skepticism or opposition. Maya returned to Oklahoma with a deeper understanding of her capabilities and a clearer vision for future contributions. Rodriguez Materials Recovery continued expanding, developing new technologies that furthered both profitability and environmental protection. Maya's success had created a legacy that extended far beyond her personal achievements. The contrast between Frank's assessment of Maya's worth and President Harrison's recognition was so complete that it illustrated the danger of allowing others to define our potential. Frank's inability to see Maya's value had driven away the person whose innovations could have transformed Miller's Auto Salvage into a regional leader. His loss became the nation's gain when Maya's expertise found proper recognition and support. Maya's story became a powerful example of American resilience and innovation, inspiring countless others to pursue their own visions despite temporary setbacks or dismissals. Her journey from worthless scrap to presidential recognition proved that true value always finds acknowledgement among those wise enough to appreciate it. Rodriguez Materials Recovery operated as a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of believing in one's capabilities, even when others cannot see them. Maya's success validated every innovation Frank had dismissed, every suggestion he had ignored, and every moment of expertise he had failed to value. Frank eventually visited Rodriguez Materials Recovery, touring the sophisticated facility that Maya had built, with federal support and technical expertise he had never recognized. Standing among the advanced processing equipment and efficient operations that represented everything he had rejected, Frank finally understood the magnitude of what he had dismissed as worthless academic theory. Maya received Frank graciously, showing him the innovations that had earned national recognition and presidential acknowledgement. Their conversation was cordial, but highlighted the unbridgeable gap between Frank's limited vision and Maya's expansive capabilities. Maya bore no resentment toward her father, but she had moved beyond the need for his approval or understanding. Maya's legacy extended far beyond her personal success to encompass the broader lessons of her journey. Her story demonstrated that expertise can develop in unexpected places, that innovation thrives when properly supported, and that recognition of true value is ultimately inevitable for those who persevere through temporary dismissal. The girl who had been told she was worthless as scrap metal had become the woman whose innovations earned presidential recognition and contributed to national priorities. Maya's transformation proved that Frank's assessment of her worth reflected his limitations rather than her capabilities, and that true value creates its own recognition when properly cultivated and supported. Rodriguez Materials Recovery continued operating as Maya's answer to everyone who had ever been dismissed, undervalued, or told their dreams were worthless. Her success proved that expertise and determination could overcome any limitation, including the narrow vision of those who claimed to know what was possible. 2 years after receiving the National Innovation Award from President Harrison, Maya Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of her expanded facility, watching her team of 37 employees process materials with precision and efficiency that had become the industry standard. Rodriguez Materials Recovery had grown beyond her wildest projections, not just in size but in impact. The operation now served as a training center for the National Materials Recovery Initiative, hosting delegations from other countries seeking to replicate America's success in domestic resource development. The morning sun cast long shadows across the industrial complex that bore Maya's name, a testament to what could be achieved when expertise met opportunity and determination overcame dismissal. The sophisticated machinery hummed with the quiet efficiency of well-designed systems operating at peak performance. Maya's innovations had been refined and perfected through 2 years of continuous operation, creating processing methods that were now being adopted across multiple industries. Maya's daily routine had evolved far beyond the solitary work she had performed at Miller's Auto Salvage. Her mornings began with briefings from department heads who managed specialized teams focusing on different aspects of materials recovery. The electronics division, led by Dr. Sarah Kim, had developed extraction methods that recovered 97% of rare earth elements from discarded devices. The automotive section, managed by former Henderson Salvage supervisor Tom Martinez, processed vehicle end-of-life materials with efficiency that exceeded anything Frank had ever imagined possible. The administrative complexity of Rodriguez Materials Recovery reflected the sophistication of Maya's vision, brought to full realization. The company maintained partnerships with 17 universities, consulting relationships with federal agencies, and contracts with manufacturers across North America. Maya's expertise had evolved from hands-on processing to strategic leadership, but she maintained direct involvement in research and development to ensure that innovation remained central to their operations. Maya's influence extended far beyond her own company's boundaries. She served on the advisory board for the National Materials Recovery Initiative, helping to shape policy and funding priorities for the entire program. Environmental organizations sought her input on sustainability standards. Technology companies consulted with her about designing products for easier end-of-life processing. Maya's voice had become authoritative in discussions about resource conservation and circular economy principles. The economic impact of Maya's success rippled through communities across Oklahoma and beyond. Rodriguez Materials Recovery had created direct employment for skilled technicians, engineers, and administrative staff, while generating indirect jobs through supplier relationships and service contracts. The company's success had attracted other advanced manufacturing operations to the region, creating an industrial cluster focused on sustainable technology and resource recovery. Maya's story had become a case study taught in business schools and engineering programs across the country. Academic researchers analyzed her journey from dismissed employee to industry leader, identifying factors that enabled her transformation and lessons that could guide other entrepreneurs. Maya regularly received invitations to speak at universities, sharing her experiences with students who might face similar challenges in pursuing innovative careers. The personal satisfaction Maya derived from her success went beyond financial rewards or professional recognition. She had created an organization that embodied values Frank had never understood: respect for expertise regardless of its source, commitment to innovation despite uncertainty, and recognition that true leadership meant empowering others to achieve their potential. Maya's management style reflected everything she had wished for but never received during her years at Miller's Auto Salvage. Maya's employees understood that they worked for someone who valued their contributions and supported their professional development. The company's training programs, educational partnerships, and promotion policies demonstrated Maya's commitment to nurturing talent and recognizing achievement. Rodriguez Materials Recovery had become the kind of workplace Maya had always envisioned, where expertise was celebrated and innovation was rewarded. The contrast between Maya's current position and her former situation at Miller's Auto Salvage remained striking. Where Frank had dismissed her ideas as impractical theory, Maya's innovations were now driving national policy. Where Frank had questioned her technical knowledge, Maya was consulted by leading experts in multiple fields. Where Frank had limited her potential, Maya had created opportunities for dozens of other talented individuals to flourish. Maya's relationship with Frank had evolved into something resembling mutual respect, though their interactions remained limited and formal. Frank occasionally visited Rodriguez Materials Recovery, touring the facility with the awkward pride of someone who had failed to recognize potential until it achieved undeniable success. Their conversations were cordial but highlighted the fundamental differences in vision that had made their working relationship unsustainable. Miller's Auto Salvage continued operating under Frank's management, but it had lost market share to more innovative competitors who adopted advanced processing methods similar to those Maya had pioneered. Frank's resistance to change had cost him not just Maya's contributions, but also his competitive position in an industry that was rapidly evolving toward greater sophistication and environmental responsibility. The irony of Frank's situation was lost on no one in Millfield. The daughter he had dismissed as worthless had become the region's most successful entrepreneur, while his own operations struggled to maintain relevance in a transformed marketplace. Frank's assessment of Maya's value had been so completely wrong that it served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing personal limitations to blind someone to others' potential. Maya harbored no resentment toward Frank, understanding that his inability to recognize her capabilities reflected his own constraints rather than any deficiency in her potential. She had learned that seeking validation from those incapable of providing it was futile, and that true worth creates its own recognition when properly developed and presented to those qualified to appreciate it. Maya's success had attracted international attention as other countries sought to develop their own materials recovery capabilities. Delegations from Japan, Germany, and South Korea had visited Rodriguez Materials Recovery to study Maya's methods and explore potential partnerships. The expertise Maya had developed in a small-town junkyard was now contributing to global efforts to create more sustainable resource management systems. The technology transfer agreements Maya had negotiated allowed other countries to implement her innovations while providing ongoing revenue streams for Rodriguez Materials Recovery. Maya's processing methods were being adapted for different materials and market conditions around the world, multiplying the impact of her original research and development efforts. Maya's influence on policy development extended beyond materials recovery to broader questions of innovation support and entrepreneurship development. She testified before congressional committees about the importance of recognizing expertise regardless of its origins and providing resources for unconventional innovators who might not fit traditional academic or corporate models. The National Innovation Award that President Harrison had presented to Maya had led to additional recognition from professional organizations, environmental groups, and business associations. Maya's office displayed numerous awards and certificates, but she remained focused on continued innovation rather than past achievements. Her success had created platforms for greater impact rather than endpoints for her ambitions. Maya's personal life had also transformed, along with her professional success. She had purchased a home in Tulsa's historic district, a restored craftsman house that reflected her appreciation for quality and attention to detail. Maya's personal relationships had improved as her professional confidence increased, allowing her to form friendships and romantic connections based on mutual respect rather than the defensive isolation she had maintained during her years with Frank. Maya had begun dating Dr. James Chen, Sarah's colleague at the University of Oklahoma, who specialized in environmental engineering. Their relationship was built on shared intellectual interests and mutual professional respect, providing Maya with the kind of partnership she had never imagined possible during her years of isolation at Miller's Auto Salvage. Maya's home had become a gathering place for the extended community of researchers, entrepreneurs, and policymakers who shared her vision for sustainable resource management. Her dinner parties brought together diverse groups of people working on related challenges, creating informal networks that generated new collaborations and innovations. The woman who had once lived in a cramped apartment above a junkyard office now hosted international conferences and policy discussions in her elegant home. Maya's transformation was complete not just professionally but personally, reflecting the confidence and fulfillment that came from having her expertise recognized and her contributions valued. Maya's story had inspired countless others who faced similar challenges in gaining recognition for unconventional expertise or innovative ideas. She received hundreds of letters from entrepreneurs, researchers, and employees who had been dismissed or undervalued by those around them. Maya's success provided proof that persistence and self-belief could overcome even the most discouraging circumstances. Maya had established a mentorship program through Rodriguez Materials Recovery, providing support and guidance for young entrepreneurs seeking to develop innovative businesses in sustainable technology. The program reflected Maya's understanding that expertise could emerge from unexpected places and deserved support, regardless of conventional credentials or backgrounds. Maya's foundation also provided scholarships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds who demonstrated aptitude in science and engineering. The program specifically targeted students whose potential might not be recognized through traditional academic measures, reflecting Maya's own experience of being undervalued despite possessing exceptional capabilities. Maya's legacy extended beyond her personal success to encompass the broader transformation she had helped create in American materials recovery and resource management. Her innovations had contributed to reducing foreign dependence on critical materials while creating domestic employment and economic opportunity. Maya's work demonstrated how individual expertise could contribute to national priorities when properly recognized and supported. The impact of Maya's journey from Frank's dismissed daughter to nationally recognized innovator continued expanding as her story inspired policy changes, educational reforms, and business practices that better recognized and developed unconventional talent. Maya had proven that expertise and innovation could emerge from any environment when nurtured with proper support and recognition. Rodriguez Materials Recovery operated as a living testament to the power of believing in one's own capabilities despite others' inability to recognize them. Maya's success validated every innovation Frank had dismissed, every suggestion he had ignored, and every moment of expertise he had failed to appreciate. Maya's transformation from worthless scrap to presidential recognition had become more than personal triumph. Her story demonstrated that American innovation thrived when expertise was recognized, regardless of its source, and when determination was supported with appropriate resources and opportunities. The girl who had sorted materials in her father's junkyard while dreaming of greater possibilities had become the woman whose innovations earned international recognition and contributed to global sustainability efforts. Maya's journey proved that true worth cannot be diminished by others' inability to perceive it, and that expertise ultimately creates its own recognition among those qualified to appreciate its value. Maya looked out over her thriving operation one final time before heading to her office for a video conference with European partners interested in licensing her latest processing innovations. The morning sun illuminated not just the sophisticated facility she had built, but the countless possibilities that remained to be explored. Maya's story was far from over, but its central message was already clear. Worth is not determined by others' recognition, but by the courage to pursue one's vision despite temporary dismissal or opposition. Frank's assessment of Maya as worthless as scrap metal had become the foundation for achievements that exceeded his capacity to imagine. Maya's transformation proved that his words reflected his limitations rather than her capabilities, and that true value always finds recognition when properly cultivated and presented to those wise enough to appreciate it. 5 years had passed since Maya Rodriguez first heard those stinging words from Frank Miller, and the world had transformed in ways that neither of them could have anticipated. Maya stood in the marble lobby of the Rodriguez Institute for Sustainable Innovation, a research facility that bore her name and housed some of the most advanced materials recovery laboratories in the world. The building itself was a testament to what could be achieved when vision met opportunity, when expertise found proper recognition, and when determination refused to accept limitation. The institute had grown from Maya's original facility into a comprehensive research and development center that employed over 200 people across multiple disciplines. Environmental scientists worked alongside metallurgists, economists collaborated with engineers, and policy researchers developed frameworks that other countries were adopting as models for sustainable resource management. Maya's transformation from dismissed junkyard worker to director of a world-renowned research institute represented more than personal success. It embodied the potential that exists within every person whose capabilities exceed their circumstances. Maya's daily routine now included responsibilities that would have been unimaginable during her years at Miller's Auto Salvage. She began each morning reviewing reports from research teams working on projects that spanned continents and addressed challenges affecting millions of people. The Electronics Recovery Division had developed methods for extracting rare earth elements that were being implemented in facilities across Asia. The Automotive Materials team had created recycling processes that were reducing manufacturing costs for major automakers while improving environmental performance. The contrast between Maya's current influence and her former isolation was striking in ways that extended far beyond professional achievement. Where Frank had dismissed her ideas as worthless speculation, Maya's research was now cited in peer-reviewed journals and international policy documents. Where Frank had questioned her technical knowledge, Maya was consulted by Nobel laureates and cabinet-level officials. Where Frank had limited her potential, Maya had created opportunities for hundreds of researchers and thousands of workers to contribute to meaningful innovation. Maya's office occupied the top floor of the institute, with panoramic windows that offered views of the Oklahoma landscape where her journey had begun. The space was designed to reflect both her technical expertise and her appreciation for the practical applications of knowledge. Advanced analytical equipment sat alongside samples of materials from around the world, while her desk held correspondence from heads of state, alongside technical papers from graduate students whose research she was supporting. The personal cost of Maya's success had been substantial but worthwhile. The years of building Rodriguez Materials Recovery and establishing the institute had required sacrifices in terms of personal relationships and leisure time. Maya had invested everything in proving that her vision was not just viable but transformative. The isolation she had experienced during her years with Frank had been replaced by meaningful connections with people who shared her commitment to innovation and environmental responsibility. Maya's relationship with Dr. James Chen had deepened into marriage, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared intellectual passion. James had left his university position to become the Institute's Director of Environmental Policy, bringing his expertise in regulatory frameworks to complement Maya's technical innovations. Their collaboration exemplified the kind of professional partnership Maya had always envisioned but never experienced during her years of trying to earn Frank's recognition. The couple's home in Tulsa had become a center for the informal networks that connected researchers, entrepreneurs, and policymakers working on related challenges. Maya's dinner parties brought together diverse groups of people whose combined expertise was addressing some of the most complex problems facing modern society. The woman who had once eaten solitary meals above a junkyard office now hosted conversations that influenced international environmental policy. Maya's influence on global resource management had expanded through partnerships with organizations in over 30 countries. The processing methods she had developed were being adapted for different materials and market conditions around the world, multiplying the impact of her original innovations. Maya's expertise, first developed in the isolation of a small-town junkyard, was now contributing to efforts that spanned continents and affected billions of people. The economic impact of Maya's work had created ripple effects that extended far beyond her own success. The institute employed researchers and support staff, whose salaries supported local businesses and communities. The companies that licensed Maya's technologies had created thousands of jobs in sustainable manufacturing and resource recovery. Maya's innovations had generated economic value that measured in the billions of dollars, while addressing environmental challenges that threatened global stability. Maya's story had become more than an inspirational example of individual determination. Academic researchers studied her journey as a case study in innovation development, identifying factors that enabled unconventional expertise to achieve recognition and impact. Business schools taught courses based on Maya's methods for transforming technical knowledge into commercial success. Policy researchers analyzed her experience to develop better frameworks for supporting innovation, regardless of its source. Maya had used her platform to advocate for changes in how society identified and nurtured expertise. She testified before congressional committees about the importance of recognizing capability regardless of conventional credentials. Maya spoke at international conferences about the need for institutions that could support innovation even when it emerged from unexpected places or challenged established thinking. The National Innovation Award that President Harrison had presented to Maya had led to additional recognition that reflected the growing understanding of her contributions. Maya had received honorary doctorates from universities that had initially overlooked her potential. Professional organizations that had once been skeptical of her unconventional background now sought her leadership and guidance. Maya's influence on educational policy had been particularly significant. She had advocated for reforms that better recognized diverse forms of expertise and provided support for students whose capabilities might not be apparent through traditional academic measures. Maya's foundation had funded programs that identified and developed talent in underserved communities, creating pathways for innovation that might otherwise go unrecognized. The transformation of Maya's relationship with Frank had been gradual but meaningful. Frank's initial anger and defensiveness had evolved into grudging respect as the magnitude of Maya's achievements became undeniable. Their interactions remained limited, but Frank had begun to acknowledge that his assessment of Maya's potential had been fundamentally flawed. Frank's visit to the Rodriguez Institute had been particularly poignant. He toured the sophisticated laboratories and research facilities that represented everything he had dismissed as impractical theory. Frank observed the hundreds of employees whose work was based on innovations Maya had tried to implement at Miller's Auto Salvage. The disconnect between his former assessment of Maya's worth and the reality of her achievements was so complete that it served as a powerful reminder of the dangers of allowing personal limitations to blind someone to others' potential. Miller's Auto Salvage had struggled to remain competitive as the materials recovery industry evolved toward greater sophistication and environmental responsibility. Frank's resistance to innovation had cost him market share to competitors who adopted the kinds of advanced processing methods Maya had pioneered. The operation that Frank had believed was sufficient was gradually being marginalized by businesses that embraced the changes he had refused to consider. Maya harbored no resentment toward Frank, understanding that his inability to recognize her capabilities had ultimately freed her to pursue opportunities that were far more significant than anything possible within his limited vision. Frank's dismissal had been painful at the time, but it had forced Maya to seek recognition from people qualified to appreciate her expertise, rather than continuing to waste energy trying to convince someone determined not to see her value. Maya's mentorship programs had become models for other organizations seeking to identify and develop unconventional talent. The Institute's fellowship programs provided support for researchers whose backgrounds or approaches might not fit traditional academic patterns. Maya's commitment to nurturing diverse forms of expertise reflected her understanding that innovation could emerge from any source when provided with appropriate recognition and resources. Maya's work with international development organizations had extended her impact to communities around the world that face similar challenges of resource scarcity and environmental degradation. The processing methods she had developed were being adapted for use in developing countries, creating economic opportunities while addressing environmental problems. Maya's expertise was contributing to global efforts to create more sustainable and equitable resource management systems. The woman who had once been told she was worthless as scrap metal had become a figure whose influence extended across multiple continents and affected millions of lives. Maya's journey demonstrated that expertise and innovation could overcome any limitation when combined with persistence and the courage to pursue opportunities despite skepticism or opposition. Maya's legacy was being carried forward by the researchers and entrepreneurs she had mentored, the students who had benefited from her educational programs, and the communities that had been transformed by the industries her innovations had created. The institute would continue operating long after Maya's active involvement ended, serving as a permanent testament to what could be achieved when expertise was properly recognized and supported. Maya stood in her office one final evening, reviewing proposals for new research initiatives that would extend the institute's impact into emerging areas of environmental technology. The setting sun cast long shadows across the Oklahoma landscape, illuminating the path that had brought her from Frank's dismissive words to international recognition and lasting impact. The girl who had sorted scrap metal while dreaming of greater possibilities had become the woman whose innovations were addressing some of the most critical challenges facing human civilization. Maya's transformation proved that worth is not determined by others' recognition, but by the courage to pursue one's vision despite temporary dismissal or systematic opposition. Frank's assessment of Maya as worthless as scrap metal had become the foundation for achievements that exceeded not just his imagination, but the possibilities he had ever considered viable. Maya's success demonstrated that his words reflected his limitations rather than her capabilities, and that true expertise creates its own recognition when properly developed and presented to those qualified to appreciate its value. The Institute operated as Maya's ultimate answer to everyone who had ever been dismissed, undervalued, or told their dreams were unrealistic. Her success proved that expertise and determination could overcome any constraint, including the narrow vision of those who claimed to understand what was possible within the boundaries of their own experience and imagination. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.